All right, moving on a little bit to the situation in the Ukraine. All signs point to the West trying to move into some sort of confrontation with Russia. Putin seems very diplomatic in this whole situation. He's coming across as the sensible one. He's making all of the right moves in the public, and the West seems ham-handed, careless, and incompetent. What are the West's motives here? Do they even really actually have a plan? It doesn't seem like there's a comprehensive plan going forward here.
Well, I think there is a plan, and it's been pursued over 25 years. You may remember that when the communist government of East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, or DDR, when that collapsed in late 1989, and then as that was worked out with treaties and the Warsaw Pact was also dismantled, there was a pledge specifically within Germany that NATO would not move east. They even promised, the German government promised that NATO, meaning U.S. and British and so forth, military equipment would not be moved into the former East Germany, that the old German border was as far as NATO would go. But then, unfortunately, under Clinton, and then even more extreme under Bush the Younger, there's been this push to extend the NATO membership all the way to the Russian border. So it's not just Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Slovakia. They've all joined. That's, I think, most of those under Clinton. But we get these I think, crazy situations where Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia are members of NATO. Means that Americans are supposed to fight and die for a bunch of hotheads and crazies in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. They're demagogues, and the only thing they have to offer is anti-Russian demagogy, right? Their economic policies don't work very well. They're all neoliberal, of course, right? IMF shock therapy, deregulation, privatization, destroy the social safety net, bust unions, race to the bottom. So that creates a lot of tension in the society, and they want to unload that by blaming Russia for all of their woes, right? And we're getting people into a frenzy about that. You want to fight and die for that? I'm sorry, no. The answer is no. And this stuff was done, from the point of view of the American people, this was done in the dead of night. In other words, 310 million Americans had their lives committed to these reckless and irresponsible regimes, pretty much in the dead of night, politically speaking, right? Because there was never any U.S. debate, right? Do you want to go and die for Estonia, for example, right? That's the farthest out there. A lot of these places are the countries where Nazi SS battalions get honored every year. So, and of course, that's the case in Ukraine. And the push, I think, from the more extreme NATO circles is that they want Georgia to become a member of NATO. They want Ukraine as a member of NATO, and they want Moldova, right? This area, it's sort of a disputed area between Romania and Russia, more or less. Do you want that to become a member of NATO? So it's again a former Soviet member republic of the USSR. So that's one side of it. The other side, of course, is the color revolutions, right? You have to remember, the basic policy of the CIA and the State Department is to smash all existing nation states into pieces. This is the mini-states, micro-states, rump states, warlords, secessionism, partition, you name it, right? Failed states, what they've done, right? Look, Libya, failed state, Czechoslovakia split into two, Serbia carved, right, bombed and then carved, with Kosovo being removed and put under criminal gangs, pretty much. Iraq, pretty much de facto in 3 parts now. Plans are ready to divide Iran into 5 or 6 parts, Pakistan into 4 to 5 parts, and even beyond that, right? There's a plan, the Brzezinski plan for Russia, not one Russia, but 3, 4, or 25. And China, similarly, right? Remember, as recently as the 1920s, China was divided into 25 warlord jurisdictions in the mid-1920s. And that's what imperialists want. They want petty, squabbling, pathetic, useless little entities that will never have the power to say no to J.P. Morgan Chase or Blackwater or ExxonMobil, you name it, right? They're just too weak, too pathetic, too much at odds with their neighbors, and that's essentially what the U.S. and the British have been driving for. And one of the ways you do that is with these color revolutions, right? The color revolutions. I warned about this in my book, Obama: The Postmodern Coup, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate. There's still, I think, probably the best systematic treatment of the color revolutions you're going to find anywhere. The current phase, I mean, it goes back to the overthrow of Marcos in the Philippines. It goes back to even Portugal in the mid-70s, right? The Carnations Revolution, right? But specifically for our purposes, 2000, you have this bulldozer revolution in Prague. I'm sorry, in Belgrade, right? In Belgrade, Serbia, right? Overthrow of Milosevic. And then you've had the Roses Revolution in Tiflis, Georgia, to put in the fascist tin pot Saakashvili. And the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, right? The tragedy of Ukraine starts in November 2004 with the Orange Revolution, a NATO destabilization, which overturned an election, right? It was a clear victory for Yanukovych, and NATO didn't want that, so they got the Golden Youth, right? You get 20 or 30,000 Golden Youth into the plaza, the main square, and at that point, you know, the fact that there are 50 million people who don't see it that way, that doesn't exist, right? This is on television, so it's a cynical recipe, and then it went on, right? It can be stopped. Clearly, in Beirut, there was the Cedars Revolution, which did not succeed to the extent that they wanted, and now we're getting sort of the second wave, right? Obviously, the Arab Spring of 2011; those were color revolutions. In most respects, but now in Ukraine, last autumn, it's a color revolution, but it's not the Golden Youth anymore, but it's now relying on fascists, on neo-Nazis and neo-fascists who collect around this city of Lvov, Lviv, Lemberg in German, Leopold in French. It's the town in western Ukraine. It's been part of Poland at different times, but that seems to be the center of this fascist tradition in Ukraine. Ukraine, of course, two different countries, right? The West is practically Roman Catholic, uniate in effect, looking to the Pope in Rome, who really ought to get in there and reform these people, and then the eastern part, Russian Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox, and looking to Moscow. And if you want to have a decent government, you'd have to have a balance of those two. One way to do it would be the Austro-Hungarian model, right? The dualism, right? You'd have two virtually sovereign republics, right? Maybe sharing foreign affairs and defense and finance and a couple of other things, but they would have to be on an equal footing, and neither one would be able to impose its will on the other. But that's not what NATO wants now. And so you've got all of that, right? You've got the NATO business. You've got the question of the color revolutions. As I've said, there's also the immediate looting, right? There's a great desire to loot Ukraine. What can you loot in Ukraine? Well, there's the Black Earth region. It's one of the greatest agricultural areas in the world under the secret text, which I've seen, of the International Monetary Fund shock therapy plan, which is now beginning to bite in Ukraine. The Black Earth region, it may be the best farmland in the world, according to some calculations. That's going to be sold off to foreign speculators. There's also this pipeline network. It looks like they're going to be forced to transfer the pipeline network ownership to somebody like Chevron at either a very low price or zero, right? $1 or something like this. Then there's also coal and steel, right? There's Krivoy Rog, which is the steel, the iron ore part, and then there's this area around Donetsk, Donbass, which is coal. So this was, under the Soviet Union, this was one of the most heavily industrialized coal and steel areas in the world, and it's gone downhill to some degree, but it's still there, and it's still lootable. It's interesting that the guy who's been put in as the governor of Donetsk, I believe, one of those two provinces anyway, Taruta, is somebody who's an expert in asset stripping and destroying older industrial facilities. His previous looting job and asset stripping job was to attack the Lenin shipyard in Gdansk, Poland. Remember where Lech Wałęsa and these Solidarność union agitators came from? Well, that's been destroyed, and Taruta was the guy who destroyed it. So if you're there in Donetsk, Donbass, you would have to say, well, this guy is coming to destroy my livelihood, my job, and this entire industrial tradition. So there's all that. There's the looting. And then there's world domination, right? Because if you look at the geopolitics, right, there are three considerations that have been important for Russia. Right? Anybody with a high school diploma should know this stuff. It used to be on the New York State Regents examination, Jake. So here it is. First of all, Russia is landlocked to some extent and icebound otherwise. So the big imperative in Russian history is to find warm water ports, ice-free ports. Well, the Black Sea is not exactly ideal because you've got to get out of it through that narrow channel, right? The Straits, the Bosporus, and the Dardanelles controlled by Turkey. But still, those are warm water ports. Odessa, but also Sevastopol, the naval base, and some others. So historically, they've wanted to have these warm water ports. You can't just take that away. Another question is the fact that Russia has been invaded so many times, right? In the 1600s, it was the Polish forces. In the 1700s, it was Sweden, the Great Northern War. In the 1800s, of course, Napoleon, and in the 1900s, Hitler, or Germany actually twice, right? Once under Ludendorff and Hindenburg, all the way pretty much as far as they got in the Second World War, they got in the First. But then of course Hitler getting to Stalingrad and then being turned around. So there's a tremendous sensitivity in the Russian political thinking to the idea that the royal road to invade you is going to be in the hands of a hostile power. It's intolerable. Think of all the hysteria in the U.S. about Cuba being friendly to the Soviets, right? All of that, right? That's 90 miles from our shores. Well, Ukraine is 0 miles from your border, right? So they're right there. And the other one, of course, is the fact that this is conducted under fascist and neo-Nazi, explicitly pro-SS, pro-Hitler auspices, right? Again, that Lvov tradition. You look at these parties. The Svoboda Party of Chanibok, they're in the government. Their armed wing of hooligans, the Right Sector or Pravy Sektor, that is, those are neo-Nazi organizations, and they were condemned as such by the European Union when they first got into the Ukrainian Rada, the parliament, right? The European Union in Brussels said, "This is really bad. You've got a bunch of Nazis here. You gotta get rid of them." So there they are. So look at this wonderful foreign policy under Kerry, right? Kerry of Skull and Bones, right? The Freemasonic clique that has brought the United States so much woe and slaughter. Bush the Younger, Bush the Elder, all the mistakes that were made and crimes in the conducting of World War II, McGeorge Bundy and the Vietnam War. As soon as you get Skull and Bones into power, you've got a disaster on your hands. But apart from Skull and Bones, we've had a foreign policy based on Nazis in Ukraine and cannibals in Syria, right? People who think it's cool to cut open the body of their dead enemy and literally eat their heart. So that's the wonderful policy of the current Kerry State Department. And now there are also psychological reasons, if we have time for that. Putin is hated. He's demonized, right? Why is he hated and demonized? I think you were right to say much of what he does is passive. In other words, he's responding. He's playing a defensive card, right? He didn't try to invade anybody. What he did was he responded to the fact that NATO and the European Union and the U.S. had ostentatiously insisted on having a coup d'etat, a putsch, in Kiev on the 21st of February, violating an agreement that many of the NATO foreign ministers had signed the previous day with Yanukovych, right? So, when Brzezinski wanted to get when Brzezinski wanted to get the Soviet Union to invade Afghanistan, what did he do? He sent teams in to destabilize Afghanistan in the course of the summer of 1979, and then the Soviets responded. So the idea is, if you insist on having a coup d'etat, especially a fascist one, an anti-Russian one, in a bordering country, there's likely to be some response, right? Compared to Afghanistan, this response is rather contained, right? It's certainly a controlled response. But the importance of the Crimea is that you've got to have that naval base at Sevastopol. Otherwise, you don't have a Black Sea fleet, and if you don't have a Black Sea fleet, you don't have a Mediterranean fleet. And I am one of the few who's actually been to Tartus, Syria, and at least taken a look at the Russian naval facility there from the outside, and that's, of course, a very important part of trying to reestablish some kind of balance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean, right? It bears on the Israelis, right? One of the reasons the Israelis can do what they want is that Syria is tied up, right, and under attack by ISIS as well as all these other groups. So I think if you put it all together, now the question of hating Putin, it goes like this: the neocons want to have, and they put this in writing with Wolfowitz in 1992, the neocons want to have uncontested, unopposed world domination militarily, right? They don't want to have anybody that could stand up to them. And, of course, the Russian military can, because they have the Topol intercontinental ballistic missile, right? They can defend themselves. They can't be attacked with impunity, right? And we know nuclear weapons, if you don't have nuclear weapons in this world, you're a sitting duck. Saddam did not have them. Pakistan does. What's the difference? Well, that Saddam was invaded and Pakistan was not. And this, you could make other examples. So Putin provides, even today, a significant counterweight to the lunatic excesses of the neocons. And not just of the neocons, but also this other group that we have to see, right? The ones that have come to the fore under Obama. I call them the humanitarian bombers. Samantha Power, does this ring a bell?
Sure.
This charming redhead at the UN. Well, Samantha Power is a humanitarian bomber, and what she succeeded in doing, it's been well said, she has weaponized human rights. She makes the human rights rant into an aggressive weapon against countries that have done precious little except offend the demands of the U.S. and British imperialists. You can call them humanitarian bombers or responsibility to protect. And of course, they don't protect anybody. Look at Libya. They said, "Oh, we have a responsibility to protect Benghazi." Well, today Benghazi is descending into chaos and living hell, and they don't care about it. Right? Bernard-Henri Lévy is another guy, right? The guy who convinced Sarkozy to bomb Libya in March of 2011, right? So they hate Putin because he stands in their way militarily. He stands in the way in the Security Council of having these humanitarian bombing campaigns. What we see, by the way, in retrospect, is that Medvedev's stupidity, I have to say, Medvedev's stupidity in not vetoing the Libyan resolution is something that's it's been a tragedy not just for Libya, but all these other countries, Chad, Niger, Central African Republic, down into Nigeria, right? That entire Sahel area has now become extremely turbulent because of the weapons that were captured by these crazies in Gaddafi's armories, and have now been sold and distributed, all the way into Syria and Algeria, and pretty much all the way down to the lower edge of the Sahel, and I'm sure beyond that, around the world, right? And you want to know where anti-missile systems come from? Book. Well, they could come from Gaddafi. And that, of course, that is what Ambassador Stevens was doing in Benghazi when he was killed. His last meeting was a Turkish official. Why Turkey? Because they were going to ship those weapons into Turkey and then set them loose against Assad in Syria. So Putin deprives them of the direct military intervention card. He deprives them of the humanitarian bombing through the Russian veto. He deprives them of their color revolutions too, because he's defeated the attempt. McFaul, right, the U.S. ambassador in Russia until February this year. McFaul was sent over there to organize a color revolution, and he failed miserably. And they still have him on MSNBC. So I think this is tragic.